Psychiatrist is tonight telling ITV News that the state of mental health care in the UK is shameful. Figures show just over 50,000 people were sectioned under the Mental Health Act in England last year. Black people were nearly 4 times more likely than white people to be detained under the Mental Health Act. And there's been a 53% increase in the number of children in mental...
Here are the facts. In the film The Manchurian Candidate, shadowy communist forces use brainwashing, hypnosis, and drugs to turn an ordinary US soldier into an unwitting assassin. This soldier has no knowledge of his experiences. Instead, his programming is triggered by Queen of Hearts playing card. After he carries out his specified task, he forgets the entire sequence. It's a frightening proposition, and it makes for hair-raising fiction. But could it happen in real life? Several intelligence agencies actually did try to create unwilling sleeper agents, and they weren't all communist. In fact, one of them was the CIA. Here's where it gets crazy. During the 1950s, the CIA ran a top-secret operation codenamed Project Artichoke. According to a CIA memo from 1975, Artichoke is a code name for the study and use of special interrogation methods and techniques. These methods include the use of hypnosis, drugs such as morphine or sodium pentothal, and psychological torture techniques such as total isolation. Project Artichoke arose from Project Bluebird and eventually transformed into the more well-known Project MK Ultra. Over the course of this project's lifetime, it addressed several disturbing questions, such as, can an individual be made to perform an act of attempted assassination involuntarily under the influence of artichoke? To answer this, the CIA contemplated several tactics that, were they common knowledge, would have generated an enormous uproar and outrage from the American public. To this day, the details of this murky operation are largely unknown. There is evidence that the CIA used LSD on interrogation subjects and also conducted numerous interrogations and experiments with other drugs, searching for a combination of techniques and substances that could produce extraordinarily compliant, suggestible individuals. According to the current historical record, these experiments were largely unsuccessful and at times disastrous. There was also at least one documented death linked to this series of programs. About a week after a CIA representative gave Army civilian Frank Olson a dose of LSD, Olson died, crashing through a window and plummeting to the ground. The death was ruled a suicide. But how close did the CIA come to creating an unwitting assassin? The most disturbing piece of evidence comes from a 1954 memo, wherein the Artichoke team describes and analyzes a plan to drug a well-connected foreign national, brainwash the subject, and return them to their normal surroundings with no knowledge of the event. The goal was to make this subject an involuntary assassin. Once triggered by a certain symbol, phrase, or other stimulus, the subject would attempt to kill his or her designated target. In other words, to create a real-life Manchurian candidate. The memo states this is a hypothetical problem and also concludes that the operation would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. There would be very little time to imprint the programming. The agency would have almost no physical control of the subject, and the access to the subject would have to take place in a social situation with non-CIA company. Additionally, the Artichoke team realized that any news of the operation could ruin further missions. This evidence only proves that the agency contemplated these types of operations, but the lack of further detail leads many investigators to suppose the field operations may have been more extensive than the CIA would have the public believe. After looking through the heavily redacted files and searching for masses of missing data, we only know one thing for sure. There's still something they don't want you to know about Project Artichoke.
Favorite conspiracy theory? I mean, you see the Manchurian Candidate with Denzel Washington? It's fascinating. Mind control stuff is fascinating, I guess. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of that's real.
Occult practices done by celebrities and people in power. Is it strictly LARPing or does it do something? Because I'll say I think it does something. I think it does something. And I think it's I just think it's very unwise to tamper with that stuff. because I don't think that whatever it is that you can get from that, it's not like you can get it in spite of what God wants.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think, yeah, ultimately at the spiritual level, there really are, you can do things that cause things to happen at an energetic level, right, in this reality. So I would say there are people that will engage in extremely wicked actions.
So you can do things at an energetic, spiritual level to make things happen.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like it's like, participating in transferring various energies through actions. So the way they view it, like if you read people like Crowley or these Michael Aquino, these kind of ritual magic people, they think that you're channeling and directing energy to what you want your will to be. Whereas, so it's like a technology, but in the Christian sense, it would be more so you're aligning your will with God. So you're not like trying to make reality the way you want it to be. So, but they think that you have to kind of engage in both good actions and evil actions to have the full range of experience. So you got to master evil as much as good. And thus, like doing the worst actions can like send energy to certain people, places, events. So that's how they view it.
That's how it's viewed by Crowley and
like that type, yeah. And I would say amongst the actual elite, very wealthy people, some of the people believe that. I think some of them don't. They're just atheistic and, pragmatic about it. But
if we start with a person, an imaginary person, a fantasy person, as it were, even a fantasy child, who has a whole self on the inside that is connected with their consciousness. They have a natural, spontaneous ability to fight for themselves, to know who they are, to know what they like, to know what they don't like, to know how they're feeling, to know when they're being violated, to know when they're happy, sad, to have interests, to have talent, to have natural, spontaneous creativity, natural, spontaneous expressions of their self. And then this child, this imaginary person, this person who, to some degree, is everybody that I've ever seen in the world, experiences violations. Experiences sometimes crushing violations. Violations of the body, violations of the emotions, violations fundamentally of that sense of self. Their self is penetrated, attacked, criticized, shut down, broken. And what happens to that person, that self, is naturally, the first thing is they rebel against it. They want to expel the violator, get rid of the invader, defend their boundaries. But what happens when those violations continue regardless? And the person learns through the most painful experience of life, through overwhelming emotion, that nothing he or she can do will stop this violation.
Police are still trying to figure out why a gunman ordered fire at Florida State University. 3 students were hurt before police killed the shooter. Hours later, one student found out just how close the gunman's bullets came to him. Anna Werner is on the campus in Tallahassee. Anna, good morning.
Good morning. Yes, police are still trying to determine a motive for this shooting here on campus that happened just after midnight Thursday morning. What they do know is that in the months leading up to the shooting, the man who opened fire appeared troubled and thought the government was out to get him.
There has been a shooting in the library.
Cell phone video shows students at Florida State's Strozier Library just minutes after the gunman opened fire.
I turned around very slowly and saw the gunman take 2 more shots at another person.
Hours later, senior Jason Durfus realized just how narrow his escape was. After he got home, he found bullet slugs lodged into the heavy books stuffed inside his backpack.
I was terrified, and there was nothing else in my mind except for survive, survive, survive.
The shooter has been identified as 31-year-old Myron May, a 2005 FSU graduate who until last month was employed by the district attorney's office in Las Cruces, New Mexico. May's fraternity brother described him as a well-respected member of the community.
Wouldn't really do anything to harm anyone. If you needed him, he'd be there. He'd give you a shirt off his back. if he had to.
But in the months leading up to the shooting, several troubling incidents occurred. New Mexico police reports obtained by CBS News show that in October, May's former girlfriend complained he was harassing her. She said he had developed a severe mental disorder, and he believes that the police are after him. In September, Myron May reported to police himself that he was being watched and observed and could hear voices coming through the walls. Law enforcement sources also confirmed that May sent 10 packages through the mail to friends throughout the country. All have been told to call authorities when the packages arrive.
Where he expressed fears of being targeted and that he wanted to bring attention to this issue of targeting.
May resigned from his position as an associate trial attorney in New Mexico last month. He moved back to Florida about 3 weeks ago, friends say, to begin a new life. Gail?
All right, Anna, thank you.
Into the death of a 23-year-old victim of a Birmingham killing spree has found Jacob Billington was unlawfully killed. He was one of 8 victims of knife man Zephaniah McLeod, who was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 21 years in 2021. Today, a coroner said there were key communication issues. Our reporter Sangeeta Lal has been at the coroner's court in Birmingham for us this morning. Sangeeta, how did today's inquest conclude?
Well, today's inquest found there were multiple failures in Zephaniah McLeod's mental health treatment during his time in prison before he killed Billington in September 2020, and there was no adequate plan in place for his release. Now, McLeod stabbed 23-year-old Jacob Billington in the neck while he was on a night out in Birmingham with his friends. And this all happened just 5 months after Zephaniah McLeod had been released from prison, but crucially after it was known that he was a high risk to the public and that his mental health had been deteriorating. Now, McLeod, who was 27 years old at the time of the attacks, was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic who had told probation officers and his mental health team that he heard voices in his head telling him to stab and kill people. Now, while serving time for other offences, it was known he was violent, had stopped engaging with mental health services and had stopped taking medication. And today
Here are the facts. In last week's episode, we investigated projects Artichoke and MK-Ultra, secret CIA programs that used drugs and psychological manipulation to conduct unsavory experiments on U.S. citizens and possibly foreign nationals. Most conspiracy theorists have heard of MK-Ultra. Today it's often cited in pop culture, such as movies and video games. But what if MK-Ultra isn't the worst of the bunch? Some, and not all of them conspiracy theorists, believe the American public victim of a massive bait and switch, that Project Artichoke was more than a few weird psychological studies, and that it was much, much worse than Project MK-Ultra. Here's where it gets crazy. Enter Operation Dormouse. In A Terrible Mistake, the murder of Frank Olson and the CIA's secret Cold War experiments, journalist H.P. Albarelli Jr. argues that the CIA and the Ford administration purposefully leaked information about MK-Ultra. Albarelli argues that beginning in 1975, the government attempted to divert attention from Artichoke. But why? Albarelli believes that Artichoke encompassed some of the CIA's most reprehensible secrets they would kill to keep. This was hardly out of the ordinary. Albarelli argues that the CIA had already murdered scientists at the dawn of the Artichoke program. For example, the reported suicide of Frank Olson, who allegedly jumped from a window after being earlier dosed with LSD, was a thinly veiled murder. If all this is true, then what exactly happened during Project Artichoke? Albarelli presents Artichoke as the operational side of the mind control experiments studied in MK-Ultra. MK Ultra was associated with prestigious colleges, research labs, and prominent professors, measure of credibility and indemnity. However, Project Artichoke may have authorized numerous clandestine, highly illegal operations on unwitting foreign nationals and U.S. citizens. These experiments allegedly included non-consensual drug dosing, brainwashing techniques, and long-term attempts to create unwilling assassins. According to Albarelli, by the mid-1970s, the CIA knew the public was out for blood. The 1975 Rockefeller Commission report and congressional hearings headed by Senators Frank Church and Teddy Kennedy triggered high-level meetings between the Ford administration and the CIA's General Counsel. The CIA allegedly believed that revealing carefully selected information about MK Ultra would take the heat off Artichoke. Some of America's most influential political players have been accused of participating in the cover-up, including Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. During these meetings, the CIA allegedly informed the White House that they'd made a secret pact with the Department of Justice in 1954, essentially guaranteeing that they would not prosecute CIA operatives for criminal activities. If this was true, the implications were explosive. But those weren't the only skeletons in the closet. Olson was allegedly murdered because he had told people about a pre-Artichoke experiment in France, where operatives dosed the entire town of Pont-Saint-Esprit with drugs. Currently, the U.S. government has not confirmed any of these allegations. But if Albarelli is correct, then what exactly were the Ford administration and the CIA trying to hide? The publicly available information on Project Artichoke and MK Ultra is disturbing enough, yet it appears there may be even more stuff they don't want you to know.
Found key issues with communication between his team at HMP Park, Birmingham and Solihull NHS Trust, and another agency designed to protect the public called MAPPA. Essentially what the inquest found is they were all working separately and weren't communicating with each other. At one point, no one within these agencies knew where McLeod was. And what the coroner today said was that there was no provision available or guidance when a high-risk prisoner is released, and has prepared a prevention of future deaths report that these agencies will now have to respond to.